Lee Holloway is the youngest daughter of a dysfunctional family, meaning a family that failed to build a healthy family. However, her parents tried to pay attention to her. Holloway was put in a mental hospital because she tried to harm herself and had to be treated there for some time. At that time, her parents picked her up from the hospital, but Holloway was indifferent to her parents. One day, Holloway attended a friend's wedding. But she was alone at that time. Holloway became acquainted with a man named Peter. Then they danced at the party. Holloway didn't like the appearance of her father's person because it disturbed her dance with Peter. Holloway came home with an annoyed face and collected sharp objects, then boiled hot water and hurt herself. After that, she went to the swimming pool. That's how Holloway treats herself when she faces problems. However, Holloway must be able to live independently without having to depend on his parents who are always arguing at home. Holloway is learning to type and dreams of becoming a secretary. Her mother supported this intention and accompanied her and picked her up when she studied. It turns out that Holloway is very diligent in studying, so her typing skills are quite fluent. After feeling that her typing skills were sufficient, Holloway looked for an advertisement in the newspaper that needed a secretary. Holloway studied interviewing in front of a mirror to reassure herself if she was called for an interview by an employer. So she went to the house advertised in the newspaper for a lawyer named Gray. Holloway was declared to have passed. In fact, Holloway was declared to have passed above the average of those interviewed. Holloway started working from lifting gallons of water to dispensers and other jobs. Holloway's mother was happy because Holloway had been accepted as a secretary, and she always took Holloway to her place of work and picked her up. At the start of work, of course, Holloway was very awkward at work. Her job was not just typing letters, she also did work that required physical strength, such as lifting gallons of water. But her mother always provided support by taking her home and picking her up. Another mistake that Holloway made was that an important file was thrown into the trash. Holloway had to look for it back in the trash. At that time, her mother came and often annoyed Holloway. This incident often irritated Gray when she saw Holloway because at first she understood that many mistakes were made at the start of work. Especially when Gray's wife is also watching her. When she was called by a client of Gray's, Holloway's concentration was disturbed because Gray's wife was also talking to her. She put the conversation on hold on the phone when she called the client back, breaking off the conversation. Gray's wife also stepped on the clothes on the hanger for Holloway to clean. At that time, Holloway was in a depressed state and wanted to hurt herself. This surprised Gray. Occasionally, Holloway is invited by Peter to a restaurant to forget about the conditions at her job. Holloway's time with Peter was full of jokes and laughter. But then Holloway had to go to work as usual. On that day, Gray hurriedly came to the office and looked very upset and angry, and immediately became angry with Holloway and showed that Holloway's typed letter had many spelling errors and asked Holloway why she didn't check her typing before sending it to his client. Gray pointed out the error in the letter and immediately corrected it. Holloway is frightened by the mistake she made. Holloway typed carefully and read the typed letter again. Likewise with other tasks. Holloway and Gray started a BDSM relationship, namely bondage, dominance, sadism, and masochism. Holloway develops a crush on Gray through sexual sadomasochism and falls in love with him. This can be commonplace between employees and employers. Holloway also met Peter, but his attitude was normal. But the opposite situation happened with Gray, who felt awkward with Holloway. That's the relationship between Holloway and Gray. The relationship between employer and employee, or BDSM, starts from a gentle relationship and becomes rough. Gray also ends up feeling sexually aroused because of Holloway's submission. On the other hand, Holloway also experienced the same thing. She likes it even though Gray sometimes treats her harshly. Instead of feeling tormented, Holloway ended up smiling and laughing at being treated like that. Holloway's day-to-day work continues. Sometimes Holloway's mother comforted her child because she thought she was stressed at work, but she didn't know what was actually happening. Her mother only suspected that Holloway was doing too much tiring work because his employer was a lawyer, who did a lot of typing work before holding trials in court. Holloway also goes to her boyfriend, Peter, and ends up making love with him. And Gray also knows this, especially since Peter and Holloway had this relationship in his office. Finally, Gray fired Holloway from her job and took it upon himself to type the letters and burn Holloway's photos. That's how Holloway felt very sad when she was fired by Gray. She cried and Gray's words hurt him. Holloway packed her things before leaving her workplace. Throw away items that are no longer needed. Holloway imagines that there will be another new secretary who will replace her position. Then Holloway met Peter, who was about to propose to her and gave her a wedding ring. Holloway accepted the proposal and had already prepared her wedding dress for her wedding day. Then on the wedding day, in her wedding dress, Holloway left the wedding and went straight to Gray's house and left the wedding ring that Peter had given her. Holloway arrives at Gray's house and shocks Gray, and Holloway cannot marry another man including Peter and wants to marry Gray. Of course, Gray was confused, not knowing what to do. Gray wanted Holloway to leave the room, but he himself left the room and Holloway sat in his room. That's when Peter came to ask about their wedding day, but Holloway said she didn't want to marry Peter. Gray is actually not sure that Holloway loves him, even though he actually has feelings for Holloway, who always surrenders to her. Gray witnessed an argument between Peter and Holloway due to their wedding plans being threatened with cancellation. Likewise, several family members, such as Holloway's parents and friends, doubted Holloway and Gray's relationship. But it seemed that Holloway didn't care about the situation, and neither did Gray, and let Holloway remain in his office. It turned out that Holloway remained in that place until she waited for Gray's arrival. Seeing Holloway's determination, Gray went to his office and saw Holloway still at the table. Gray's arrival was covered by journalists and local residents. Gray brought drinks and took Holloway to another room and washed her in the bathroom. It's clear they both love each other. This is something that Gray and Holloway have not been aware of. Then they tidied up the room in the house because it had been messy before.
Melted into an
That's the story of Gray and Holloway, between an employee and an employer who ended up loving each other and they got married. Gray also works as usual and they have their own house and a happy life. Holloway finds a life partner, namely her own employer.